Thank you so much. Pages of notes here and such important information, authentic, thorough, understand that so much is out of your control. It's a business decision, really important information. Let's have our first question from a student. Emily, you are up.
Hi, so my name is Emily. I'm a junior at Glenbard South High School, and thank you so much. That was an incredible presentation. I truly learned a lot. And I know you had mentioned a lot about doing extracurriculars for the intrinsic value. So I was just wondering about the like quantity over quality when it comes to extracurriculars and the college admissions process. If you could talk a little bit about that.
Yes, I love your question. Thank you. Yeah, this is a great question, quality over quantity. And I'll tell you, when you sit down, you guys will see this, when you sit down to fill out that application online, they give you a bunch of boxes and you will feel the pressure that you have to fill out every box, right? It's like when they're there, you feel like you got to fill them all in. And the truth is you don't, however many boxes they give you, you don't have to fill them all in. But a good piece of advice is you have to give as much information as you can to what you're doing, because oftentimes admissions officers won't appreciate your commitment, your talent, your interest, because it does vary from people to people. And to give an example, like I said earlier, I was the National Honor Society president back in 1997. I did nothing because the school required nothing of that position. However, I would read applications where a National Honor Society president at another school really had a lot on their plate, right? They were fundraising, they were giving speeches, like they were doing a lot. And usually when you fill out your application, they'll give you a little line. You'll be able to kind of explain in very brief words what that activity is. And so I tell students to really choose those words carefully. And this is a time, don't be afraid to brag, right? So if you're a National Honor Society president that really does something, say, hey, I raised $20,000 in a candy sale or whatever. Like tell the admission, don't assume that they know anything. Another really, this is kind of a little detail, but a fun one. Don't use acronyms. So many people assume, even with NHS, National Honor Society, like admissions officers probably know what that is, but you don't want to assume. And so many schools, at Glenbard South, you might have acronyms for activities that you guys all know, right? Like, oh, of course I'm in the ABCDE club, but admissions officers don't know what that is. So you want to really useful words, give as much information as possible. And this is not a question you asked, but I'm gonna leave you with this little tidbit because it's kind of a juicy fun fact that I share in the book. But when I worked at Dartmouth, there was one year that a student applied and he was amazing in his application, except his email address handle was, and again, I have to make this confidential, but it was something to the effect of like, like I break for hot moms, right, at gmail.com. It was this totally crazy, inappropriate email address. And we read this application and everything else was stellar. And we got to this email address and we were like, this is insane. Like, why is this kid self-identifying with this silly email address? And it was even sillier than that. But that kid ended up not getting into Dartmouth, and it was solely because of his handle. And so I say this not to scare kids. I am not in the business of scaring kids. You guys have enough scary stuff. I don't really care. However, the point is, even your email address can tell us something about you. So if your email address is I love hybrid cars at gmail.com, right? That's telling the admissions office something about you and something as silly as your email address. And so I'm not telling you to change your email addresses, first name, last name at Gmail is great. But just when you do fill out that application, remember that every little thing is telling the admissions committee something. And I hate to make you do more work, but the truth is, when you fill out your resume, when it comes to quality or quantity, it really comes down to more like, how are you telling the admissions committee that this matters to you? Because that's what's going to stick with them. If you give them a laundry list of stuff and don't really say anything about it, they won't know what's really meaningful. And yet, if you write, one thing and you give them a lot of information, like that can be very helpful. So just squeeze it in and no acronyms.
Thank you so much. That's really helpful. I really appreciate it. And thank you for everything.
Thank you.
That's really great. Let's take a question. Juliana, you are up.
Hi, I'm Juliana. I'm a senior and I go to Glenbard East. I just want to say, like, thank you so much. This presentation has actually been really helpful because you answered some of like the top questions that I have had to think about for like the past year. So it's been really nice to hear from you. But since I'm a senior and I'm going through the college application process, my question that I had is, do you have any suggestions for how I can manage time with college applications, courses, and extracurricular activities?
That's the hardest part. That's the hardest part. And I'm so sympathetic. And I have to say, you know, I sit here and I listen to myself, and all I'm doing is giving you more work, right? I'm like, you can't use acronyms. You got to write more. You have to be thorough. You have to edit everything. I'm giving you more work. And I hate that about the truth of where I sat, is that, you know, it's an important application process and you have to devote time to it. And unfortunately, you're a senior already, right? So I find that, you know, I tell kind of younger students, think about it as you're going to be taking a class, like, because it takes as much time as AP Bio, right? And so you're going to have this extra course load when you get to your senior year, and you have to think of it as a class. I also tell students, you know, do as much as you can during the summer, and a lot of it you can't do, but you can think about essay topics. You can, for the younger students out there, you can look at the application. I mean, you can all go online and create an account and look at the common application and see what's going to be asked of you, which is also very helpful. Side note, because there's so many rumors out there about what's asked. Like, for example, I can't tell you how many times people would ask me, what should I do with my summer? And I'd say to them, we don't even ask that question. Like, there's no question that says, how do you spend your summer? But so many people think that is a question that, anyway, back to your question. So my best advice is, carve out meaningful time for the prep work for it. And what I mean by that is that if I were you, what I would do is I would say to myself, okay, I'm going to start with a blank piece of paper, and I'm going to write down all the things that Becky wants to tell an admissions committee before I even think of the application. So I'm going to write down that I love soccer. I'm going to write down that I love rescuing dogs. I'm going to write down that I love English and I want to be a writer someday. I'm going to write down like the top 5 things that I really care about. Then I'm going to look at the application and I'm going to say, okay, how am I going to squeeze these things in, right? So if I know I'm writing about like rescuing dogs in my essay, then I don't need to spend that much time with that on the resume piece. And basically it's like working backwards. And again, taking control and saying, I'm not going to let them ask the questions. I'm going to think about what I want to tell them. And then I'm going to try to figure out how to get that in. And sometimes I used to do essay workshops a million years ago. And sometimes students would find their essay topics they already knew what they were before they even read the prompt, because they knew what they wanted to tell an admissions committee. And the good news is one of the essay prompts is, you know, topic of your choice. And so I would say, you take a step back and say, okay, what are all the things I want to fill in? And then that way you're not dreaming up things that don't get included, but you have a little bit more control to get in there. And then unfortunately, I would just say, carve out some time. And, you know, it's so hard because you don't want your academics and the learning for the sake of learning to get, you know, the worst half of this. Because academics do come first and being able to go to school comes first, but it is time consuming. And I wish you all the best because it is a lot of work.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Really good advice. Maybe get the application ahead of time. Think about it in the summer. I like that idea of think about the most important things you want to share. Get that on a blank piece of paper. How am I going to fit it in so that they get to see the authentic me? And it's all in here. What's the question, Becky, that you get asked more than any other question?
You know, I get a lot of questions about early decision. And I think it's just because it's such a technical thing. Like, a lot of families will say, we're not sure we can identify a school by November 1st, because November 1st is the deadline for a lot of colleges and universities. And it's early for students. Like, you know, my poor senior I was just talking to, I mean, November 1st is in a couple days, right? And filling out the application by November 1st can be a challenge too, because you need more time, or you need, this, that, and the other thing. So I get a lot of questions about early decision. And unfortunately, it is a brownie point at a lot of schools. And so it can be a little bit of an advantage at some schools to apply early when it comes down to your admit rate. But I tell students, take control. If you want to go to Middlebury and you can get that application complete, authentic, thorough, and feeling good by November 1st, go for it. If you feel like you have no idea where you want to go, take the extra time. Don't do it on someone else's timeline just because of the pressures of it. Do it for yourself. And then, I get a lot of questions about testing. Lots of SAT questions, which are natural. And as I, spoke to, I just think those are the ones that get the most headlines, they get the most airtime. And yet when it comes down to the actual application, they're not as controversial as people think, because typically testing just is one piece of kind of that academic whole.
Rebecca, I think you've got a question.
Yes, I was just gonna ask a question about letters of recommendation. You talked about, the 3 letters of recommendation, one from a counselor and then from 2 adults who really know you, and maybe having a conversation with the adult about something that they could write about. Are there any other tips or strategies that kids should utilize when asking an adult for a letter of recommendation? And then also, just making sure it has the information that student wants covered?
Yeah, great question. Yes, I mean, first of all, I would also say some schools, not many, will specify if they want particular letters of recommendation. So for example, if you're applying to an engineering school, they might say, we need at least one of those letters to be math and science. So first, word of caution, when thinking about recommendations, read the fine print for whatever school you're applying to and make sure that you're filling the recommendation requirements. Most schools, in my opinion, don't care who writes those recs. I mean, we wouldn't care if they were first-year teachers, if they were elective teachers. We were just looking for who can give us the most information to comment on that transcript. As you know, writing recommendations is a pain. My brother-in-law is a history teacher. He writes a ton of them, and he'll say to me, like, he's trying to do the best job he can. But, students who can help, again, with, even writing an email and just saying, hey, Mr. Smith, I loved dissecting a frog. I'm making this up again. Whatever. I loved dissecting a frog. I never thought I'd love dissecting a frog. I don't know if you remember me from sophomore, anatomy, but I decided that because I learned about the frog's eyeballs, I'm going to become an optometrist. Just whatever this crazy stuff is. Give them some stories. Help them out in an email, just because that helps their letter. Secondly, some people will have useful additional letters of recommendation that should be submitted. And what I mean by that is that like maybe you have a clergy member, maybe you have a boss, maybe you have a coach, maybe you have a third teacher who is from, whatever, Mandarin school on Saturday mornings, whatever it is. You can send in additional letters of recommendation. There are no rules. You can send whatever you want to these schools, and most of the time they'll just add it in their application. Now you have to kind of put your common sense hat on that you don't want to send a lot of them, because you'll start to seem desperate, particularly if they say the same thing over and over. We didn't talk about this, but when I worked at Dartmouth, I averaged 12 minutes an application, which is insane. But that's all the time I had. I had to get through about 5 an hour. And so you're moving through those applications. And so you don't want to, if you send a lot of other stuff, you risk, like, the admissions committee might not read all the other stuff that's in there. So, but if there is an additional person, I kind of feel like that onion, layer of the onion. If you have, a clergy member who you've known forever through some sort of religious education, they can send letters. Like I talked about the custodian recommendation, that was an additional letter. And if you're up at 4 a.m. and you think, gosh, I really should have sent a letter from, my boss at McDonald's, send the letter from the boss at McDonald's. Don't hold back. Because again, you are given evidence to your lawyer to make the case for why your application, should be admitted in this competitive pool.
Thank you so much.
Don't hold.
Yeah.
Don't, go ahead. don't hold back, give evidence. 12 minutes for an application, I can see. What do college rankings really measure?
Nothing. Sorry. They do. I hate college rankings, and it's solely because they are, talk about a business. College rankings are a business. And there are lots of different factors that go into it, right? There's alumni giving, there's percentage of students that are admitted, there are SAT scores, that there are lots of different components. And from where I sit, I hate rankings. And I don't use the word hate often, but I do. I hate them because I feel like they don't say for an individual. I heard I'm stealing this from someone, but I heard someone, and I don't remember who, talk about how having college rankings is kind of like ranking honeymoon destinations, because it really depends on the couple, right? Like if you're someone who's like, I love to lay on the beach, then sure, maybe you'll rank Kauai higher than, the Massachusetts shoreline. But if you're someone who loves to travel Europe, then you're going to rate, Paris higher than Kauai. And I thought that was brilliant because it's so true when it comes to rankings. We can rank these schools, but many of them have nothing, they're not similar, right? They're doing it solely to drive business. Because if you have higher rankings, more people want to go to you. It drives down your admit rate, which is a joke in and of itself. I can get on my high horse about how rankings are very unhelpful. And so I suggest, think of college rankings like you would a honeymoon ranking, right? What do you want? You rank your own schools. Because a fun fact, and I think this is a good kind of thing to end with the night, because it just lets me, again, find some peace, is that this is a fact. The majority of United States colleges and universities admit the majority of the applicants in their pool. And I'm going to say that again. The majority of United States colleges and universities admit the majority of the colleges in their pool. And it's just a reminder that there is so much talk about these so-called elite institutions, and they're great. Dartmouth is great. Don't get me wrong. They're fabulous. But, there are other schools that are really fabulous, that are getting people jobs, that have, great financial aid packages. It runs the gamut. And, when I worked at St. Lawrence University, it was lower in rankings. And yet there were some programs there that I thought were much stronger than Dartmouth programs, right? It depended on what you were going to major in. And so I say, let the rankings fly out the window and you do your own rankings. You rank your own honeymoon destinations, and you will get in somewhere. And that's, I find faith in that. When I worked at Dartmouth, it was very, very, very rare that a student didn't get in anywhere, particularly if they started the search with an open mind and they thought about their own honeymoon destination rankings and didn't just focus on, these schools with these ridiculously low admit rates.
Keep an open mind.
Yeah.
Great way to end. You really helped us stay sane while applying to college. And
I hope so.
It's a wonderful book. You really have done a service to so many families, and we're so grateful for the time you spent with us tonight. Thank you so very much. All the best. Go say goodnight to the kids, and we'll go hug our kids as well. Thank you, Becky, so much. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.
Thank you, GPS.